Hello, I'm Nikil.
And I'm Shankar. This is Chai Across Generations. This is episode 30, A Passage to India, Nikhil's version. In today's episode, we're going to talk about Nikhil's recent trip to India.
Yes, I am excited to share, Shankar. I was in India for the last 2 weeks, and I'm
Mhm.
back and slowly trying to get over the jet lag.
Wow. So it seems like it must have been a very interesting trip and not just jet lag, but there's probably some culture shock and reverse culture shock coming back.
Yeah, there is. There is.
Uh,
Do you want to tell the audience a little bit about our title?
aha. So, you know, you said we'll call it a trip to India, and I thought a passage to India sounds more dramatic. But then you put in this Nikhil's version, which I didn't quite get when you
Yeah.
first put
Are
it in.
you?
Tell me about
You're
that.
okay. So, in case you're not familiar with the reference, this is a reference to uh, Taylor's version. So, Taylor Swift has been re-recording all of her albums because she doesn't have access to the masters. Um,
Right.
and so, in order to gain access to her old music, she's had to re-record them. So she's re-releasing her first several albums. I think her plan is to re-release all of the albums she doesn't have access to, and titling them, you know, like "Speak Now"
Wow.
is an album. "Speak Now," Taylor's version, is the one that she's now
Right.
re-recording years later. So we thought we'd do a passage to India, Nikhil's version on this one.
Yeah, I didn't get that reference the first time. But although I'm not a Swiftie, the issue of artists' rights is something very close to my heart.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm actually supportive of what she's doing, and I think it's very tragic that she didn't get to own the rights to her material starting out. So
Right.
maybe
Yeah.
maybe there's some uh, common feeling I can get with
Yeah.
you
And
and Taylor Swift.
exactly. Are you just as supportive of my trip to India as to as
Yeah,
to our
of
rights?
course, of course, of course. So tell me more.
Yeah. So the trip was wonderful. I went for a friend's wedding, which was in Chennai. It was 2 days in Chennai, and what was so wonderful about it is my friend is Hindu and her husband is Sikh. So the wedding was a, a blended wedding between two cultures. I'd never been to a Sikh wedding before, but they did such a wonderful job bringing the two weddings together. Shout out to Karthika and Prem for such an amazing weekend. And then after the wedding, I was able to go spend time with my family in Salem. But as you said, every trip to India is always a trip. It's you you learn a lot about yourself and a lot about the culture, right? About kind of where we came from.
Uh-huh. So did you say you went straight to the wedding? Did I hear right?
Yes, landed and then a day later the wedding started. So uh,
Okay.
landed in
Okay.
Chennai, stayed in Chennai for the wedding. Have you been to a Sikh wedding before?
No, as a matter of fact, no, I haven't.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it's wonderful.
Yeah.
There's this really cool tradition where before the Sikh ceremony, they have a ceremony called Milni. And
Uh-huh.
in Milni, what happens is it's kind of the entrance into the wedding ceremony. You have the
Right.
bride's family and the groom's family who meet up. Really, the both sides meet up. But then the two families essentially introduce themselves to one another. So,
Mm.
everyone's standing kind of in a circle, and then the parents of the bride and groom come to the middle. They exchange garlands, they shake hands, they take a photo. And then after the parents are done, maternal grandparents do the same thing, paternal grandparents do the same thing, uncle and aunt, brother and sister.
Oh, that's nice.
And so
That's
it's
lovely.
really wonderful. It's a real wonderful
Yeah.
welcoming of the family, right? Um,
Right.
what was really special for me is my friend doesn't have a biological brother, right? She just has a sister. So I stood in as her brother and
Oh, nice.
got to meet the groom's brother and welcome him, and it was just a very special experience, a very spiritual
Yeah.
experience.
Yeah. It's a huge honor to begin with,
Yeah,
but also the extension of brotherhood, I'm thinking, was very significant for you.
absolutely, absolutely. Yeah,
Yeah.
and this is a friend where we were our fathers knew each other growing up, so we were kind of childhood friends. And even though we
Mhm.
haven't been as close in more recent years, to see those bonds play out and to see how strong those bonds are over time is really, I don't know, life affirming in a lot of ways.
Yeah, that's wonderful. And you said it was a 2 day long wedding? Is that right?
Yes. A lot of the weddings I've been to in the last few years for my friends have
Mm-hmm.
been 2 day events,
Mm-hmm.
Saturday and Sunday, where you have a number of different rituals, right? Some of them will include a haldi event, which is supposed to be fun, and people are, wearing yellow clothing, and there's some tradition around pouring water on the bride and groom and putting turmeric on them. There's the Sangeet, which is the big dancing night, usually Saturday night.
Mm-hmm.
You dress up in Indian clothes and there's dancing. There was a Sangeet at this wedding. The
Mm-hmm.
bride side had a dance, the groom side had a dance, and there's a dance floor afterwards. And then on Sunday morning is typically the wedding itself at an early hour. In the case of this wedding, there was a Hindu ceremony and a Sikh ceremony, one after the other. Sunday night is the reception, which is kind of
Yeah.
your more traditional Western reception that you might see here. That's
Uh-huh.
how I've seen them.
Uh-huh.
How does that resonate with you?
Yeah, in India, weddings can be 3 days long,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so I think generally there are two layers to the wedding as I see it. One is what I think of as we might say it's the cultural layer and it's regional. Okay. And then the other layer is the spiritual religious layer,
Mm-hmm.
right? So the spiritual religious layer is, I think, more concerned with the actual formal ceremony, right? And there's so much variation,
Mm-hmm.
right? There are parts of India where even the spiritual religious part is done at night, or it can be done in the evening. It's done early in the morning in the south. Um, there's a lot of variation in that, and I think the cultural regional stuff is also, there's a lot of variation. So I did see the bit of turmeric haldi thing in a recent friend's Telugu friend's wedding.
Mm.
um, and I think yeah, there are a lot of variations in South India. There's meeting of the groom and the bride. There is something called, like, it's a kind of an engagement, nishchitartham, the day before. There is some fasting also. There's actually some preparation on the part of the bride and the groom for the religious event, the spiritual ceremony, just to give it a certain sanctity that you're entering something pretty serious
Right.
and things like that. So, as far as I know, there's a wide variation. But I think the biggest difference is, I think there's been a real shift in how Westerners perceive weddings more recently,
Mm.
because they've become these really glitzy, like insanely produced, hyper luxurious affairs.
Yeah.
Um, Often, I think advertised by the richest of the rich, the celebrities and stuff. So it's like Indian wedding has become it's become a trope or a theme or a meme in itself as this sort of ultra extravagant affair.
Right.
And I think one thing that our South Asian listener, or all our listeners, but probably those who are not Indians, especially those who are not first generation Indians, would want to know is that actually they're not like that in India.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, a lot of Indian weddings they are grand by the standard of living of the people who are conducting them, but they're not that extravagant as, you know. I think the emphasis when I grew up was more inviting a lot of people to feed them once,
Right.
okay, or
Right.
twice, and to make sure that nobody is left out in your social circle. And when I say social circle and your social circle, the emphasis was on the parents.
Mm-hmm.
So the bride and the groom were largely superfluous functionaries who just happened to be there at the moment, right?
Right.
It was really a marriage for the parents. But I think the big shift is in this generation in the US, it's really a marriage for the bride and the groom.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a big shift.
Yes.
And yeah, yeah.
Yeah. You're hitting on so many important things there. One thing you made me think of is that how North Indian weddings have influenced South Indian weddings, right?
Hmm.
The Sangeet is a North
Right.
Indian thing, the
That's right.
dancing night, right? Now,
Right.
in my generation, I've seen the Sangeet the last
Uh-huh.
4 weddings I've been to. Um,
Yeah.
but that never used to be the case, right? South Indian weddings used
Mm.
to be as I understand it, straightforward affairs. Everyone shows up, a lot of people show up. You get your picture taken, you sit down to eat, and then you head out. That's the wedding. I mean, certainly there's pre-wedding stuff going on, but the actual wedding is pretty cut and dry.
Yeah, I don't know. I've heard stories that there are some musical elements.
Mm,
My mom tells me about my grandma dancing some kummiyadi part and stuff like that. I've personally not seen it, but I think some of those were like folk dances would happen.
mm,
Um, but you're right. The my generation, what we experienced was not Sangeet and all that. There is music, but often it would be like a Carnatic music musician come and sing,
mhm.
or somebody would there would be a formal dance performance. The participants would not participate. It would be more like a show to grace the occasion.
Right.
That's what I remember. So you're absolutely right.
Yeah. The other thing I was going to
Yeah.
mention is that Indian American weddings are also different. And
Yeah.
I was just reading an article in the Juggernaut, which is a South Asian publication, about weddings in the US and Indian American
Mm.
weddings and how they are smaller or are becoming smaller.
Okay.
And talking about some couples who just did courthouse weddings,
Right.
right? Which I've heard my American friends do, but frankly, I have not heard Indian Americans do.
Hmm.
In some ways, it almost seems contradictory to an Indian wedding, right? Indian wedding is about having people there, and as you said, at least the perception of it is it's about splendor and doing it big. And a courthouse wedding is
Hmm.
literally the smallest version of the wedding in some ways if you just go to the courthouse and get your papers.
Right.
Um,
That's right.
but I think it's cool. I hope we start to normalize that as well, right? Everything on the
Yeah.
spectrum from courthouse wedding to big 3 day
That's
event.
right. That's right. I completely agree with you on that. So it also seems to resonate with that we versus me, the collective versus the individual. I see that shift,
Right?
honestly.
Hmm.
Um, I think in the traditional Indian context, the wedding was not about the bride and groom. It was about, as I said, the families, and it's a community event. It's a community celebration, and it's also an opportunity for the bride and the groom's parents to kind of pay back or to acknowledge the community's involvement in their lives and to fet them and celebrate the presence of the guests,
Hmm.
right? Which in its extreme must have been very difficult for the bride and groom because they were completely forgotten, and the very significance of their union, which is of course a very unique and special thing between two people, um, was very often completely relegated or non-existent.
Right.
you know um, I'm sure that was very difficult and probably um, invalidating almost in some ways. But on the flip side,
Right.
like you say, there's the other extreme where it can be just about the bride and groom, and hey, um, we don't even care about if there are other people or something like that. It's less about
Yeah.
yeah.
I think the shift is really interesting. Being at the wedding, a couple weeks ago, one thing that really struck me was how different generations were able to rally together.
Hmm.
Parents and grandparents being present, being involved, being
Yeah.
active, being excited at a wedding that looked very different than their own, right?
Yeah.
And
Hmm.
also is across state lines in India, right? Or like
Right.
national lines. Uh,
Hmm.
how many of our parents and grandparents' weddings were between two people who grew up in the same state or even the same city? And how many of the
Yeah.
weddings today happen more at at a national or international level?
Right.
So I thought it was really cool to see the grandparents and the parents of my friend and her husband come together and as I was saying about that Milne ceremony, to literally see them embracing their counterpart on the other side was so moving.
That's very special. Yeah. Yeah.
So
What are the other high points?
other high points. So the wedding was a big one. The other high point was going back to my family's hometown in Salem, which is
Hmm.
also in Tamil Nadu, and connecting with family, getting to spend.
Which, by the way, is my dad's hometown as well. So
Yeah, that's right.
technically, my hometown.
That's
Yeah.
right. It's one of the first
Right.
things we connected on when we first chatted.
Right.
I got to spend time with my grandmother and my cousins and other family members for a few days before I headed back here.
Nice.
But Shankar, okay, here's an interesting thing, right?
Sure.
So you go to India, you go to visit your
Hmm.
relatives. not all of my relatives said this, but enough of them did. You go there and they ask you how long you're there. And I was like, I'm here for 10 days. And the inevitable response is, oh, you're only here for 10 days. Why not stay for a month or 2 months? Right? From my vantage point, I feel as though, taking 10 days off of work is a bit of a bear already, right? Like, and so you're caught between this, 10 days is kind of a big trip, right? By American standards.
Yeah.
But then you go there and it's not even close to what the people want you to do, and kind of gently telling my relatives, it's funny, you all say a month or two is what you're looking for, and my, based on my work and stuff, that's like 10 days is already a good amount. So anyways, I think that balance is quite interesting.
It is. It's not even the glass half empty. It's like the glass is 90% empty.
Right. Exactly.
If somebody tells you, no, you're right. I think that's a tough one. I commiserate.
Right.
Yeah.
I do think there's a presumption behind some of that sentiment. So this is what I was kind of bumping up against in the second leg of my trip, was when a relative says, why don't you stay for a month or two? It makes me feel as though, like, there's a way to say that where it's purely inviting, but then sometimes it feels as though it's like it's prescriptive. We've talked about this before too, right? Like this idea that your family knows what's best for you, do as they do. Even as you're saying, like, the weddings used to focus on parents, right? Like parents know what they're doing, arranging for their kids. So that's a tension too that I find between generations, and maybe culturally between Indians and Indian Americans.
Right. I think that's a good point. It would have felt nicer if people are just happy that you're there for as long as you are.
Yes, right? Exactly. Because, I was spending a few hours with some relatives, and this idea of staying for a month or two came up several times in that span, right? It was like, well, why not stay longer? You can stay here. And it comes from a place of love. It's sweet, sweet gesture, but in my mind, I'm thinking, let's focus on the time we have right now. I'm here right now. Like, are we going to spend 10 of these minutes to talk about this hypothetical that's not relevant?
I know. Yeah, all I can say is I really empathize and I agree with you. We just have to enjoy the moment we have.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
And I think this goes back to some of our discussions on family, the value of family, the value of collectivism, right? Because I think there's this notion that, being with your family for a month is honorable, is kind of the right way to do it. And if you're only coming for 10 days, how much do you actually value your family? Right? It's a little bit of a challenge, or maybe a highlighting of a difference. And I could kind of feel that in some of my interactions.
I'm really glad you tapped in on that. I think you used two words, honorable and value. And value definitely came to my mind when you first articulated it. That in some sense, do they interpret that we are communicating a sense of less value to the time there or the experience there just because of, our inability to take a month or two off? So is the message implicitly we're saying my work is more important than my time with you?
Right.
Is that the understanding? Whether it's true or not, whether that's the interpretation. Right. But at the same time, how realistic is it for most people in India of our age to take a month or two off and come and stay with them?
Right. Right.
I don't think it is, quite honestly.
No, yeah, it's not. Right. And that's the thing, right? The backdrop of our lives are so different.
Right.
Right? Like the backdrop of the lives of some of my relatives in India and mine in some ways couldn't be more different. We talk about bridging the generational gap, right? Or the cultural gap. How do you bridge that gap? I don't even know. There's almost too much distance to talk, like, conceptualize our understanding of visiting for a month and the feasibility or infeasibility of that.
Right.
That is such a long, there's so many things you have to understand about one another's lives to understand why that idea is either possible or not.
Right.
I really felt that kind of gap this time around.
Mm. And on the flip side, how valuable is spending a month if one just lives a routine life with no meaningful conversations, but you just exist together and go through the rhythm? Which, I mean,
Right.
maybe there is there, but I know a lot of people who spend a lot of time with each other and don't communicate
Hmm.
also.
Hmm. Yeah.
And
The value is in the time spent, right?
right.
Even if there's not much said or not much done together.
Mm-hmm.
I find that so interesting because I think I would feel as though it might not be worth that month if there's not good conversations or a lot of quality time spent in terms of experiences. Because
Right.
I think the way it would play out is you're spending a lot of time at home in that month,
Yeah.
right? Like relatives are busy during the day. It's kind of hard for me to go places in India without someone else to come with. So
Yeah. Right.
I'm essentially 9 to 5 at home there for a
Right.
month. It just, but that's still me. I'm trying to understand. I think for my relatives, it's still meaningful to know that I would be there for that stretch.
Yeah. So I wonder if it's probably it is. You're right. It is generational, but it's also it seems almost a difference in perspective that you and I value the intensity and the quality of the time spent together.
Mm, yeah.
So even if we spend an hour a week, we are 100% engaged, and that's important and meaningful
Hmm.
for us. And I think through that experience, you get to know a person so much more deeper if you have a really meaningful conversation.
Right.
Um, so I don't know.
Yeah. That's really true.
Uh,
On a slightly lighter note,
yeah.
I went to the movies. I went to see a couple of movies in India, and I gotta say, putting an intermission in every movie
Yeah.
is genius.
Yes.
It is genius. We should.
Did
So
you see Jailer? What did you go
I
see?
did not see Jailer. I actually saw
Uh,
two English movies. I saw Blue Beetle, and then I went and watched Oppenheimer with my cousin, who
oh,
who hadn't seen it
okay.
yet. So Indian movies, there is a built-in 15-minute intermission at
Uh-huh.
in the middle. You can come out of the theater, get snacks at that time, and go back in. And even for American movies, they will just
Mm-hmm.
hit pause on the movie halfway through. You still get the 15-minute
Uh-huh.
break. So for a movie like Oppenheimer, which is
Uh-huh.
2 hours and 45 minutes, it's essentially an Indian movie. It's
Right.
wonderful to have that intermission built in, right?
Okay.
Versus when I watched it in the US, there's no intermission. You have to plan for 3 hours of being in the theater to see everything.
Right. Okay. Okay.
Are you with me?
So you like the idea?
Are you with me on intermissions for all theaters?
I think it makes sense. Yeah. It gives it gives a different feel. I agree.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I don't know. Oppenheimer was probably was it an outlier
I
a
mean,
little bit in length.
yeah, maybe. But even the shorter movie I
Yeah.
saw was about 2 hours, a little over 2 hours.
Uh-huh.
And even then, it was kind of nice to just have a breather in the middle.
Uh-huh. Did you experience a lot of audience participation in the theater?
Good question. Not a lot this time. There was definitely some.
You
Uh,
should have gone to see Jailer, man. You should go see the Tamil
so
movies.
so my cousin sort of suggested we go see Jailer, which
Right.
is the new Rajinikanth Tamil movie.
Yes.
I couldn't do it. I just couldn't do it. I'll be honest with you. I can't do this recent wave of like older
I know. I
hero,
know.
older
Yeah.
hero who is a gangster essentially, or some
Right.
form of vigilante going about
Uh-huh.
correcting the wrongs of wrongdoers.
I
Yeah,
I think if you go in with the attitude that it's pure camp, it will be
yeah.
fun.
I guess so. I guess so.
Right.
To me though,
Right.
it's just like it feels so unrealistic.
Yeah.
Like yeah, but I don't know.
Here I am speaking from the armchair of never having watched any of them. So
Maybe
as an
you and
armchair
I,
theorist,
maybe you and I need to go to one
we'll do it.
together. We'll go together.
We'll do it. We'll go together.
We'll do a tour, a podcast tour in India. We'll go and sit into whatever the latest Tamil movie is of this
Yes.
type, and we'll record from the theater. There you go.
Oh, No, that's good. And tell me about the food. Tell me about places you went to, crazy stuff you did.
Food was delicious. There are very few things in life better than a breakfast at an Indian hotel,
Yeah.
right? Because you have so in this hotel where the wedding was, you have all of the South Indian breakfast
Uh-huh.
amazingness. You have dosa
Right.
and idli and puri and masal and all this stuff. And then you also have an omelet counter and a waffle machine and a pancake counter in case
Yes.
you wanted that. And then, oh, by the way,
Uh-huh.
there's a chai and coffee stand in the corner, right?
Right.
It's like it's everything you
Oh,
could possibly want in a
I
breakfast.
know. I
Uh,
know. I know.
it's the absolute best.
Yeah, I
Um,
had to ask you about food. Yes.
yeah, and then I had a
Did
lot
you
of.
catch mango season? Did you catch
I
mango season
did, I
and all?
did. I had a mango a day
Oh,
once I got to Salem. Salem is very famous
oh,
for its mangoes, so I had a mango every
I
day.
know. Oh, you're killing me. Yes. Yes.
I wish I could have brought one back for you.
I know. And coconuts.
Yes, I had some coconuts on the side of the street.
Yeah.
I got to go with my
Oh,
grandmother. We went to my grandmother's village, and on the way
right.
there, we stopped by and you know drank some of the
Did you
coconut
have
water.
nungu also? That nungu, the palm?
My grandma tried to give me some nunga.
Uh,
Uh, I did not have any. I think I was just a little
oh,
worried. I saw like I was flying out soon after,
next year.
and I
I know.
saw I think enough flies land on the nunga at this one particular
I
roadside
know.
stop, and I was like, you know what, I should
Right.
probably say no here.
Stay away.
But
Yeah.
she was
It's nice if somebody can get it right off the tree, but
right,
that's hard. Yeah.
right, yeah.
Hmm. Oh,
So
wonderful.
so a
Yeah, you
lot,
had the full experience.
yeah, a lot of those, a lot of
Uh-huh.
biryani was consumed.
Yeah. Did you eat
My
jackfruit?
I did not have jackfruit. Yeah.
Okay.
um, my cousin and I, we joke, we call ourselves the biryani bros. So
Uh-huh. Oh, now you're making me. This is really making me want to go back.
yeah, you
Okay.
should
I
totally.
know.
We can do a Passage to India Shankar's version someday.
That's right. Re-record it. Yeah.
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 Anything else, Shankar?
Wonderful. No, this was such a lovely chat about your trip, and I really, yeah, it was nice to see India through your eyes, in a sense, and yeah, so thoughtful and enjoyable.
Yeah.
And one more of our travelogues, but this time we did it slightly differently.
Yeah, so we'd love to hear from our listeners in terms of what you may have liked about this episode since it's a new format, or if you've recently been to India yourself or to any of the other South Asian countries and want to share your experience. We'd love to hear them. You can reach out to us on our Instagram page, Chai Across Generations, or email us at chaiacrossgenerations@gmail.com.
Yeah, to reiterate what Nikhil said, all your feedback about both form and content is welcome. And as always, subscribe to our podcast and please leave us a rating or review on Spotify or wherever you get our podcasts. This really, really helps new people find our show, and we want to thank you all for listening.
See you all next time.